There was a study that was done. It was the Minnesota Longitudinal Study of Risk and Adaptation. It was a 35-year study. And what they showed was that kids who have a secure attachment history ended up that they were more likely to develop a greater sense of agency, better emotional regulation, higher self-esteem, better coping under stress, closer friendships in middle school, better coordination of friendships and social groups in adolescence, more trusting and positive romantic relationships in adulthood, greater social competence, more leadership qualities, happier and better relationships with parents and siblings. Sounds to me, right?
Wow.
Like those are some great things.
For most of human history, people have parented the way their parents and grandparents did, with culture providing the cues. We call this Parenting 1.0.
For various reasons, parents began to question these approaches, and we started turning more and more to so-called experts to learn to parent. This was the beginning of Parenting 2.0. This allowed for some real advances, but also a lot of confusion as we got further and further away from our natural parenting instincts.
Parenting 3.0 is about reclaiming those instincts and integrating them with our current understanding of child development. It brings together the wisdom of the past with the best scientific and psychological research of the present.
Parenting 3.0 isn't a fad or a quick fix. It's a set of principles that allows us to engage with our kids and life from an informed and empowered place.
I'm Jai Flicker.
And I'm Deb Blum.
Welcome to Parenting 3.0.
So today we're talking about attachment theory. And, that's going to be a pretty big topic that we're going to talk about over many episodes, but today we want to do an introduction, right? That's the plan.
Yeah.
And before we even get started on exactly what attachment theory is, we will maybe just start off with just talking about why attachment is important.
Love it.
Is that a good starting place?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm imagining that different people will have very different levels of familiarity with the concept of attachment and have heard about it from different sources. And so just trying to start from the ground up here, I think will be really useful. And I think one simple way to get at the importance and value of learning about attachment is to look at it from the child side and on the one hand and from the parent perspective on the other. And as we'll talk about in depth on this episode and in future episodes, attachment is a fundamental human need. It's maybe arguably the preeminent fundamental human need. And as such, it fuels human development. So from the child perspective, having a secure attachment will help the child grow and mature and develop as a individual on a number of different levels, starting with the neurological and all the way to the behavioral. So that's the child side. On the parent side, it turns out that the way nature has designed the parent-child relationship is that, and you can see this in human relationships as well as in animal relationships, that when there is a secure functioning attachment connection, the offspring are more willing and likely to follow the lead of the parent. So if you imagine, a mama polar bear walking through the snow and the little cubs following along behind, that's attachment at work. And so from the parent perspective, attachment, a strong, healthy, functional attachment relationship makes it easier to parent. It also makes it more enjoyable because there's an emotional component to when attachment is happening that feels good. It's sort of we are evolutionarily wired for it, and therefore sort of rewarded for it. So it makes parenting easier and more enjoyable, and it makes us more effective, which also feels good. So very simply, the two sort of sides of attachment, and why I think it's so useful and so helpful.
Yeah, that's really great. And because it's so in line with nature, for both the child and for the parent, it is, you talk about it being easier. And I think that's one of the big pieces and one of our big goals, right, is to try to take away from this idea that you need to have like a prescriptive approach to how you handle every situation, that it's more that it does actually foster this ability for the parent to know what to do in situations, because it's more natural.
Yes,
it's more natural for them.
I'll give one quick example with my 2-year-old. So understanding how attachment works gives me more confidence to lean into it when I'm feeling frustrated or something's not going smoothly. So for example, getting her socks on this morning or other mornings, if she's sort of not being cooperative, let me say it this way. I notice that she is a lot more cooperative when she's filled with attachment energy. When she's feeling really, I can tell that she feels relaxed and connected, and we've had time to hang out. So if she's not feeling cooperative, it's a reminder or a signal to me that she might not have gotten those needs met yet. And so I will lean into attachment and sort of spend a little time connecting with her, bonding, instead of trying to get into, force that conflict, that power struggle. I'll back off, connect with her. And then it's almost like once she's finished that emotional meal and she feels satisfied, then I'm like, okay, let's get your socks on. And then she hands me her foot. So it's not like she's consciously withholding until, it's not a strategy. It's on her part. It's just, there is a instinct for cooperation that gets activated when our attachment needs are being met.
Yeah.
So that's obviously a very sort of small, mundane example, but I think it scales across all the different ages and all the different situations.
Well, especially because it's one of the most challenging pieces for most parents I know when my kids were little, like getting out the door in the morning was one of the hardest things, and to know that it might not just be them being difficult and it might actually be something else, and having another possible way. I think what we're trying to say is like, if we come from this way, sort of at the undercurrent of everything, then we actually can tap into that becomes available to us all the time. It's not a strategy so much as a way of being. Like, you just knew that's what, like, this is something that I would want to give a try, right now. And it ends up probably more times than not being exactly what she needed. Yeah.
And I think just as I'm even talking this out right now, I'm realizing that for me, at times it is hard for me to like not get sucked into the frustration. But the ease part comes when, after I've kind of held back and resisted that temptation to kind of just force the issue because I'm getting impatient, and I've made sure her needs are met, I then when I come back and I'm like, okay, let's see if this works. Here, it's time to get your socks on. And then she just puts her foot up. Here you go. I'm like, that's how it should be, in a sense. Maybe not how it should be, but that's how it can be. And so it's not like it was even easy the whole time, but the actual thing that was really hard before became easy. Yeah. Right. I just want to try to paint as realistic a picture as possible here at the outset.
But I just want to say something too. I think about, even as an adult, like I'm far more motivated to cooperate, if you want to use that word,
Yeah.
with someone when I feel connected to them.
Love
Then
it.
when I'm feeling like if someone just comes in and demands something of me and I have no context and no,
Yeah.
no
Who are you?
relationship, I'm like, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But with someone, like if you ask me to do something, I have a connection with you. And even more so if we've actually spent some time together before you ask me, there's a much greater likelihood that I'm just, wanting to do something that would be, cooperative, if you will.
Yeah.
It's not a kid thing, really.
Yes, for sure. It's inherent in the attachment dynamic or bond across all ages.
Yeah, for sure. I want to just share real quick some of the things just on the level of why is attachment important.
Great.
And what it maybe provides, if you want to. I hate to use that word, but there was a study that was done. It was the Minnesota Longitudinal Study of Risk and Adaptation. Where did they come up with that name? MLSRA. It was a 35-year study, and it was about the quality of early attachment, and then what are the implications later in life. And what they showed was that kids who have a secure attachment history ended up that they were more likely to develop a greater sense of agency, better emotional regulation, higher self-esteem, better coping under stress, closer friendships in middle school, better coordination of friendships and social groups in adolescence, more trusting and positive romantic relationships in adulthood, greater social competence, more leadership qualities, happier and better relationships with parents and siblings. Sounds to me, right?
Wow.
Those are some great things.
Yeah, it's almost like, I would imagine if I was listening to this and hearing this for the very first time, and I'd maybe heard of attachment theory or the concept of attachment, that might be hard to believe. And I think for me it was in the beginning kind of hard to I'm a pretty I think a healthily skeptical ingester of new information, and so I wanted to understand how that could be true, not just that it was. So if somebody hears this and just goes, "Oh my God, that's awesome," great. But if you're a little bit more skeptical, I think that's awesome too. And my goal is to over time, because it takes time to lay this all out, even more than just one episode, to present the information clearly enough and with enough comprehensiveness that it actually answers the question, how is that? How does it do that? Why does it lead to that? Does it really lead to that? Mm-hmm. And to get to the point where it makes sense to everyone, I can see how even it could possibly do that. Yeah.
One of the other things I can imagine, I know that I have thought, and I'll actually explain a little bit about my experience on this, is that the question of is there a person might also be thinking, my kid's 17 years old, it's too late. I already first of all, probably this is not true, but that you might in your head might be thinking oh man, I already messed this up. And I just want to say that I know that that's not true. I don't just think it's not true. I've watched many people, grandparents and parents, reconcile relationships with their children. After they learn more about attachment theory, they're able to put in place new, take responsibility for things that they did and repair, because actually I don't even think I understood as much as I do now that it's not necessarily about getting it right all the time. It's, in fact, I'm surprised. I've seen this several times, but I read it again recently, that in healthy, securely attached relationships, misattunement happens something like 70% of the time. And that, so it's not this is not you need to get it right 100% of the time in order to nail this. This is about being in relationship with a person, which means that sometimes you're also going to make mistakes, and that repair is part of it. Repairing relationships is actually a big piece of how we end up with secure attachment. Yes,
for sure. And the repair process deepens attachment. Mm-hmm. And it's a really vital life skill to learn is that conflict and disconnection is is inevitable in any relationship, and so that's part of a real human relationship. It's not even getting it wrong. It's just part of real life. And so having that cycle of like connection and then conflict or disconnection and then repair and reconnection, and having that be just a like really healthy part of family life, that's going to build resilience and social and emotional intelligence. I mean, it's really good. And I even want to add one thing. It's like, it turns out that this stuff is so fundamental, so instinctive, and that lots of parents are, you don't have to be taught about attachment theory to be doing it already big time. So for me, and I think we've talked about this, so I think it's true for you as well. You can obviously speak to that, but that learning about this has confirmed things that I already felt to be true, has encouraged me to stay the course with things that I already felt were working, and has helped refine some things that were already working very well, or maybe working somewhat well but could be better. And then also filled in gaps where I just had blind spots, or I had, kind of underdeveloped aspects of myself that I realized, I really need to work on this. So I think it would be a rare exception that someone would hear all about attachment and go, I'm not doing any of that already.
Totally. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And even if a person thinks they're not, they probably still are.
I agree.
'Because there's
I don't know. I think you would really have to be like a literal absolute sociopath to not be doing any of this. Like, so if you are, maybe if you're a serial killer out there and have kids, then that could be the situation. But everyone else, that's not the case.
But people tend to be tough on themselves, and sometimes there's a way we might look at what we do and not give ourselves credit for what we do. And even when I said like you might get it wrong, I think one of the challenges in parenting is how often we feel we got it wrong, even if it really is just a normal product of being a human being in messy relationships.
Yes.
But there's a way that we feel like we got it wrong, and it's nice to know that if we have that feeling that we got it wrong, it doesn't mean that you actually have to sit in that space, that there's a lot of opportunity for repair. And it's probably even worthy for us to do an entire episode on repair, because I think when people think repair, I think a lot of people think just an apology. And while that can be worthy, there's so many ways that we can repair.
That's a great point.
So it feels like it might be a good time for me to just talk a little bit about, you said that, like how it's been for you around attachment. Yes. And I'll tell a little bit about what's happened for me. Yeah. So I've had some like humbling experiences recently, which is really great. And I always like to be humbled. But I have been a student, as have you, of Gordon Neufeld for a long time. I read his book, Hold On to Your Kids. I don't know. I mean, it had to have been at least 10 years ago, but let's just say even more than that. I want to say it was when my oldest was about 5. And I read it, and I thought it was a hard read, but I did read it. And
just for context, for anyone who's never heard of him, which might be everyone, he is a Canadian psychologist and developmental theorist, and who a huge part of the area of development that he focuses on is attachment.
Right.
Yeah. So, and Hold On to Your Kids is a lot of it's centers on attachment and some issues relating to it.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. And so when I learned about this, I've since then tried to put it into practice in my life even more. But so I'll work from recent to the past for a moment here. So recently, because I wanted to better understand some of the terminology, I decided to take a Gordon Neufeld class called The Attachment Puzzle. And it was about 16 hours, and it was so great. And I can't, now I feel even more excited to share about attachment. So, before that I was thinking, oh, I'm going to share about attachment based on my experience, which is helpful. But I was finding that I didn't have some of the language that I wanted, even having read the book. First of all, I read it a long time ago. Second of all, it was not exactly, it wasn't, it just didn't penetrate me the way that this did. Somehow being able to have seen, now that my kids are 15 and 17, it's almost like I can see, when I'm listening to them, I can see it play out in their lives in a different way. So what was humbling for me was, first of all, just, I guess I felt a little bit humbled by like nature. Just by nature, and just by like how amazing we are as humans, and how if we can really rely on human nature and actually go there, that we can see that like all this stuff that we do, this efforting that we do around parenting and like trying to try strategies and all this stuff, when actually, it's the relationship that's the fundamental key. And that if we can shift away from the role of being a parent and into the relationship between a parent and child, that is like the ticket. And so,
wait, can you say that last part again? Because I feel like it is a key insight, and I just want, I want to like really pause on that and emphasize it. That
the
last
shifting,
part.
Yes, from the role of being a parent, into the relationship that is between the parent and the child. And so it's really shifting from role to relationship.
Can you maybe just say we'll come back to it again, but one or two things about that, because I just think that's so key.
What I always said probably from the beginning of time with my kids, but I know I can remember more, more recently, is in my head, I would always just recite the relationship comes first. I would just over and over and over again say the relationship comes first. So I would actually try to ask myself as quickly as possible, and believe me, it wasn't perfect, but I would ask myself as quickly as possible, is this in service of a better relationship with my child, or is this going to degrade my relationship with my child?
Love that.
And it was kind of the way that I handled situations. So it would be what would stop me from sometimes doing things that I knew could be hurting them, hurting me, hurting us.
Just a very simple kind of universal heuristic or question to check to see if you were aligned with your core value or not. Yeah,
right. And so then it became kind of relationship first is what I would just say. Be like, Deb, sometimes I'd be like, Deb, like, don't say anything right now. Relationship first. Like, I know you want to say this thing right now, but like this is not going to be helpful for your relationship at this moment. And that if you go back and you actually process it a little bit more, you might be able to come back and say this in a way that's more like relationship preserving.
So
it was it attachment? Not exactly. And I think it will be helpful for us to talk a little bit more about how the words might, there can be some semantics that could benefit from a little bit. But I think nuance, right now, some nuance. But right now, for the purposes of
because I think what you're hinting or alluding to is that all too often people who have a very kind of introductory sense of that, or just have heard the term, it just sounds like attachment just sounds like just cuddling and just like being warm and fuzzy all the time, and that's gonna solve all these problems, and that is a very I think a very limited view, and actually maybe confusing or such a partial
incomplete
view that it would confuse more than it would inform.
Yes, and because it's also not permissiveness, and it's also not right. I mean, it's not, and it's not like sweetie voice. It's like kind of there's so much to attachment. But I think that I didn't. This is actually me going back to when they were little, because when I didn't think. So first of all, when they were very, very little, I think I did learn about attachment in certain ways, but mostly what I learned about was attachment parenting. But I don't think I fully even understood, and and I'll let you share in a moment how you see the difference. But I don't think I fully even knew what was going on for me. So I had a preemie, my first baby. And so he was 5.5 weeks early. I was not ready. I had no idea that this was going to be happening on that very day. And so it wasn't like I don't even think I was I mean, I hate to say this, but I think people are so much more conscious about how they want to be as a parent now. I was just more like, I'm having a baby. This is exciting. And then he's 5 weeks early and it's a C-section. So, nothing was what I was expecting. But I had read enough before that of just, like the what to expect when you're expecting. And I did have like my idea of a birth plan, and I was going to, I was going to be at the hospital, but I still wanted it as natural as possible. And lo and behold, I end up with an emergency C-section. And not only that, but he can't nurse. So we had to syringe feed him in the beginning, like a little bird. And he is, he's immature. He's just got an immature digestive system. There are all kinds of things happening. And so when we're leaving the hospital, the doctor says to us, and luckily we had a doctor who was attachment oriented, because this is so we're talking 17 years ago, 17 and a half almost years ago. The doctor says kangaroo care, which I didn't know at the time what that was, but I figured it out, which is skin-to-skin contact, as much skin-to-skin contact as you can possibly have. And this was even before really baby wearing was like vogue. Like, yes, people were baby wearing. There were baby Bjorns, and I wore one. But it wasn't quite the same as it is now. So you have to kind of think about that. 17 years ago is actually kind of a long time ago. But they also told me to nurse on demand. So I was like, okay, wow. Okay, like, wow, this is different than what I thought was going to happen. And so my husband and I get home, and, I'm on medication. I'm on like Percocet, and, and I'm in pain, and we're trying to figure this whole baby thing out. And literally we have to wake up in the middle of the night. I have to pump, and my husband has to syringe feed for the first week until finally things get sorted out. But so you can imagine, like, there's massive pressure on me that I have to, he has to be in the little, I have this little bed next to the bed and all this stuff. And he is, and finally, things start to get a little bit sorted out. I'm going through all kinds of stuff. I literally remember my husband leaving one day, maybe 2 weeks after. And I'm standing in the garage and I'm holding my baby and I'm like crying. I don't know if I can do this without you. I have no idea if I can do this. And I could just remember that moment. And, and so all of this stuff, like, we're trying to be the best parents we can be. And I am looking at books, trying to understand what's going on, and I'm reading Attachment Parenting. And this is the beginning. Now I can see how different attachment parenting is from attachment theory. But at the time, this is what was present in like mainstream books, I think. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but it just seems like that's what was available to me. And attachment parenting, it turns out that I didn't even realize this at the time. It was so strict with these like 7 B's, but like, breastfeeding and, bonding and, I don't even remember what they were, but there's a whole bunch of B's. And those B's were things that I put a lot of pressure on myself to do. I mean, it was like, baby wearing, breastfeeding, birth bonding, balance and boundaries, beware of baby trainers. I don't think those existed. I mainly think that at that time, Dr. Sears was saying, basically, sleep with your baby. I think these were some of the things. Sleep with your baby, breastfeed on demand, anytime, all the time. And that you had to be incredibly responsive. Like you had to be like just constant, like always responsive. But what happened is that I burned myself out. So that's all I can just say, is that it was about 5 years later or 4 years later that I started to realize that, I really, really did burn myself out. My second child came along, and he wasn't quite as demanding, but he still had his own set of demands. And I felt like, well, if I gave it to Jake, then I need to give it, we need to give it to both. So anyway, so I did, but it was a lot because I put massive pressure that I thought that I had to be this idealized version of a parent that met every single need. And by the way, both of my kids had milk intolerance, and both of my kids had reflux. And when we finally got it in order, they were amazing. They were so just like the most amazing children. But before that, they cried a lot because they were uncomfortable. And you know what? I was not going to stop breastfeeding. I'm going to figure this out. But that was like pressure. There was so much pressure. And, and I remember recently reading something that said that a mother who breastfeeds but is anxious and like stressed out is actually, if you really are talking about secure attachment, that's actually worse in many ways than if you just said, okay, no, we're going to bottle feed, but you did it with a lot of like care and attunement and love, you know, and not to say that there isn't love. I mean, so I may have been more stressed out, forcing kind of this whole nursing thing. And so that was also what was humbling.
Yeah.
Is I had this like humbling thing that occurred to me, which was that, you know, like I really could have been easier on myself if I had learned attachment theory instead and realized that it's not about being a perfect mother. It's not about having to do everything exactly the way that I'm supposed to. And by the way, I wasn't even. It's not even that I was, because no one can be.
No, it's just, but you were trying.
But I felt the pressure of it, right? I mean, no one can be a perfect parent. You're still human. You still have needs. I had to go to the bathroom sometimes. He cried while I went to the bathroom or took a shower. So it's not like
Well, and if you're sitting there thinking, and this is the problem with any sort of parenting strategy that's not presented with a certain minimum level of theoretical background, it's just like, be responsive. Like, I agree with those three. Like, if you can breastfeed, that's ideal, right? If you can, and you obviously want to bond with your child, and you want to be responsive. I mean, I totally agree with that. But you can see how, in your case alone, if you're going and if you're taking a shower and you hear your baby crying and you just think, oh my God, I'm not being responsive, without the theoretical background to understand that some separation is going to be just fine and babies are resilient, and that when you do come back and reestablish that attachment, it actually teaches them that, oh, I can trust that we can be apart and then we'll reunite. That's not only okay, it's actually helpful. It's a necessary part of the growing up process. And
exactly.
So just parenting strategies sort of that are floating out there, even if they're good, without the background can be problematic.
Yeah. Right. So and a lot of times what ends up happening is because it's also where attachment theory, as an example, is so rooted in human nature, it does really feel good when you're doing it, and when I was with attachment parenting, I didn't really have the basis except for that if you don't do this, it will be bad. That was what I really held in my head. Like if I don't.
It's not really a theoretical framework. No. That's just a belief / fear.
Right. And they've gone back. So I think people who have gone back, people who study attachment theory now can go back and look at, the great intentions. And
absolutely.
And the Sears, I think it's a doctor and a nurse that are married who coined the term attachment parenting. Their intention was great. They raised 8 kids. They probably, it's probably really awesome, and beautiful. But to come to the depth of attachment theory and understand that there's a lot more room in being a human being, and like I think you had just said to me before that babies are more sensitive and also more resilient than we on both ends of the spectrum, and I think that resilience is important. And I think I was definitely buying into the idea that if I didn't take care of every need, then I was not doing it right. Luckily, I did I also believed in, which is really good, I also am a big believer in cultivating resilience and in preparing our kids for the future. So the good news was that as they started to get older, I already had shifted into wanting to, I didn't need to fulfill every single need every single second anymore. If they could make themselves a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, then I let them make themselves a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And so luckily I think, and then I started to learn and read Hold On to Your Kids, and that was the moment, I think, where I started to see that I could take a deep breath and that there was a little bit more room for me to exist in the relationship. It wasn't 100% that that I had to be focused on them. So.
Well, and what I'm hearing you say too, and I think this is a super important point, is that if you just hear, again, this is the problem with just hearing parenting advice versus understanding, how humans bond, is that is that if you hear the advice, and we'll talk more about this, like that it's important to be responsive to your baby's needs, there's a lot of room for interpretation. And maybe my child needs a peanut butter and jelly sandwich now. Maybe my child needs a turkey and ham sandwich now. Maybe it's like we can end up trying to fulfill all these external demands or preferences, and when the actual need is much more simple and internal. It's to feel secure.
Yeah.
So a parent can support attachment and secure a sense of deep security without having to jump through every little hoop that their child is throwing at them. In fact, it's probably
that's right.
better. It's in many ways it's actually can be detrimental to the dynamic to be just like, doing that.
That's such a good point, because that's what I think I could have seen the path going to, had I not had another and I think this goes to your point before that I 100% agree with, which is that innately I think we do know so much more, and that the more we can peel away the layers of external pressure of who we are supposed to be, the more we'll find the natural place of knowing how to bond with our child and how to be connected. And then, in fact, what I found was that the more that I found that, the less that I felt I had to do all the other kind of superficial things, and I was trusting in my relationship with my child. So then I started to realize oh, well, this isn't really, they want this need met, but this isn't really what we're really talking about here. We're talking about more on the emotional level, the psychological level.
Yes.
And so I think I got that, because I can see how being responsive can be really over interpreted that it's literally I meet your every demand, not just your literal need.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So thank you for clarifying that, because actually I don't even think I had thought about when that shifted for me as clearly, but that really did shift for me. And I think that it's attachment theory that helped me it freed me. It freed me from some of this pressure that I was feeling.
Yeah. And I think one other thing, just listening to you talk, I'm imagining hearing this for the first time, and it's you would almost think well, if I learn attachment theory and I really value it, and then I go and do some, and then I integrate it into my parenting, wouldn't that just be sort of naturally kind of me doing attachment parenting? And I would say, on the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, no. And the no comes from the fact that attachment parenting is a trademarked brand of, and whatever your opinion of attachment parenting is, or if you don't even have one, that's just a fact. That's it's now kind of has some associations and some prescriptions that are associated with it. So it could be confusing to talk about attachment parenting TM on the one hand, and just attachment parenting, not the Sears version of it. And I think the good news is you kind of don't need the qualifier attachment, because all parenting involves attachment. So if you learn attachment theory, and then you consciously integrate it into how you're relating to and raising your children, you're going to be doing attachment parenting, aka parenting.
Yeah, exactly.
So what we're really talking about is parenting. And even the idea of parenting 3.0 is not, again, it's not, like we've talked about before, it's not a set of prescriptions. That's why we're avoiding giving prescriptions, and we're focusing more on principles to apply, because that, I think, helps us to connect to that natural way of relating, rather than coming up with this, again, reinforcing this role of I'm a parent, and a parent does these things, and so I'm going to do these things, check.
Yeah. Yeah, especially because, just to reiterate this, that
Yeah.
it is, for me, for sure, the more that I became externally oriented on these ideas of like what I was expecting and the check, and I need to do these things, because I did that. You know, I was really like, I remember a time when I was like looking around at people and like, how do I need to be as a parent? What's the best parent, like amalgamation of all parents, and I'm going to be that parent. And the more I did it, the more it took me away from myself,
Yeah.
and then took me
Wow.
away from my natural intuitive sense of how to be a parent.
Yeah.
So it's really as much as like you're saying that kind of like, you know, just in contrast of like what we're doing versus not doing. I mean, I honestly think that those strategies are what take us away from that natural ability. I also understand it's hard because there's a lot of strategy out there and there's a lot of pressure that people are feeling to do that. So, you know, I acknowledge the pressure. I was in it too. And I also say, wow, like, isn't it so nice though that there is another way? So I would love for you to talk more about, like, let's just go into attachment theory.
We've talked a lot about what it's sort of not. I mean, we've hinted at what it is and why it's important, but let's talk about attachment theory.
Yes. Thanks, everyone. That does it for part 1. And we're excited to bring to you the next episode, which will be diving a lot deeper into attachment theory. We're going to be talking about something strange.
Very strange.
Very strange. Well, actually, it's literally the strange situation.
Yes.
So that'll be part 2 of this little series that we're doing here.
On attachment. All about it.
Right. And so we invite you to subscribe, to like, to share for sure. Share. If you like it, please do share with other people. And also to leave a comment, rate, review us. That would be really helpful.
Very helpful.
Yes.
So we'll see you next week.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.